Well, I kinda knew this was coming, but it's still very exciting to see. A brand new Crash Bandicoot platformer coming hot off the heels of the Insane trilogy and Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled. This time with the development team responsible for the Spyro Reignited trilogy at the helm. And not only that, it's coming really soon, provided it doesn't get delayed, that is. Hell, they're even straight up calling it Crash Bandicoot 4, they're that confident in it. But now that all eyes are on this upcoming Crash Bandicoot 4, I'm sure quite a few of us are taking another look at the game that many of us were originally calling Crash 4. 2001's Crash Bandicoot: The Wrath of Cortex, originally released as a PS2 exclusive before going multi-platform a few months later. This was the second console-exclusive Crash game to be developed by a third-party team, after Universal Interactive took the license from the original developer Naughty Dog, the first being Crash Bash. Though, it was the first mainline Crash platformer to be made by a new team, while Naughty Dog was off making their next original IP, Jak and Daxter. Hell, the two games were even released just a month or so apart from each other, so it was a pretty good time to be a platformer fan. And I'm starting to feel a little nostalgic, so let's take another look at the other Crash Bandicoot 4. Now, I have the Xbox version, so that's the version you're going to be seeing in this video. The biggest difference in this version from the others is the much shorter load times, which the PS2 version was pretty infamous for. Other than that, some fur textures were added to the characters, and this is only visible in the Xbox version. I hear the GameCube version was decent enough too, but I never played it, so I can't comment. And I think that about covers it. So the plot starts out with Dr. Neo Cortex, who somehow manages to escape being trapped in the distant past at the end of Crash 3, as he and his cohorts are getting chewed out by Uka Uka for...
Your track record for spreading evil is pathetic!
Not spreading enough evil. Okay. His secret plan to finally defeat Crash, who always foils his plans for world domination, is inadvertently revealed to be a super strong Bandicoot who has the potential to finally defeat Crash once and for all. The only drawback is that this super weapon requires a power source in order to function, which Uka Uka suggests a group of 4 masked spirits known as the Elementals, beings capable of controlling the elements of the world and cause natural disasters. Which brings us to our heroes, who are interrupted from their much-needed vacation by said natural disasters. Aku Aku instantly knows what's going on, and after confronting Uka Uka, reveals that the only way to drive the elementals back into hibernation is with the help of crystals. The same ones that appeared all the way back in Crash 2. So how did Crash and Coco plan on finding these crystals? With the help of a virtual reality hub system that Coco's been working on since the end of Crash 3. Honestly, they could have just called it a teleporter, because that's what it essentially does. There's no actual virtual reality involved. It functions in the same way as the Time Twister system used in Crash 3 as well. Somehow, the crystals are scattered to other parts of the world. Maybe they're like the Dragon Balls and scatter after every time they're used. It's never explained, it's just a cheap way to structure the game like Crash 3. Which brings us to the gameplay. When you first start playing, the game seems really promising. The first level is a standard linear Crash level that you're familiar with. The controls feel right, and the jumping has just a little bit of floatiness to it that feels nice without feeling like you're too heavy or too light. One thing I noticed is that the areas where you're capable of moving seem to be more expanded than they were in the PS1 trilogy, which can be nice to traverse in, though I did find myself completely running past enemies instead of attacking them. But other than that, these standard platforming levels are pretty fun when you actually get to play them. These pure platforming only levels only make up a small fraction of the game. If you thought Crash 3 had a lot of vehicle levels, Wrath of Cortex just cranks it all the way to 11. In what was seen as one of the biggest criticisms of the game, the grand majority of Wrath of Cortex are either these vehicle-based levels or platforming levels where the vehicles play some kind of part in the platforming. And honestly, they really overdid it here. Sure, Crash 3 had you do things like ride on animals, scuba diving, flying, driving a motorcycle, and riding a jet ski, but they were still broken up by a majority of regular levels. Wrath of Cortex will have you driving a Jeep away from stampeding rhinos, driving a Jeep in a race against other characters, rolling around in a big glass ball, piloting a really awkward mech, driving a slow, awkward submarine, riding on a scooter, snowboarding, driving a handcar, riding in a minecart, flying, 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 flying. And while a few of these can be fun in their own right, some of them just feel unnecessary. One of my least favorite levels in the game is one where you pilot a flying bug thing that has you sinking ships, but instead of a standard fire button, you have to hold down the A button to slowly lock onto them in order to fire. It requires you do this 3 times per ship in order to finish the stage. All the while, enemies are firing at you. On the plus side, it only shows up in one level in the whole game, but it does make me question why it's even here. And the other levels I hate are the ones where you have to pilot a submarine, and judging from the fan reception, this appears to be a lot of other people's least favorite levels too. Not only do you move pretty slowly in this thing, enemies have a tendency to come flying at you with all piss and vinegar. Also, the foreground has a bad habit of obscuring your view, so you'll likely not see enemies or mines coming at you to clap those cheeks. And for some reason, in order to turn around, you have to press the direction you want to go in twice, or else Crash will face forward. At what point am I going to need to face forward in this thing? Where the game does try to do something a little different in a more meaningful way is its boss fights. In other Crash games, you'd square off against one of Cortex's minions, but this time around, you always fight Cortex's super weapon, series newcomer Crash Bandicoot, powered by one of the elementals. And this leads to some really interesting boss fights. Not only does Crunch's form change depending on which elemental is powering him up, but the way you go about fighting him is different too. And while the fights themselves can be a bit hit or miss, the very first one being my personal least favorite of the group, it's still really cool to see Crunch in so many different forms. The other bosses from the other games, like Engine and Tiny Tiger, still appear, but they've been relegated to either shooting at you in the flying stages or as obstacles in the rolling ball levels. I remember a time when Tiny Tiger was a genuinely intimidating character, but now he just looks like he's there to half-ass his way to a paycheck. Just like in Crash 3, defeating each boss will reward you with a new power-up. And they're all the same exact ones that you received in Crash 3. Aside from the Super Belly Flop, which you now have at the start. This gets replaced by a Sneak ability, which is only ever used to walk slowly over Nitro Crate platforms. This is the single most situational move you get in the whole game, and you won't even be using it that often. Also, for the first time in the series, Crash's sister Coco is now fully playable, and no longer relegated to just jet ski or tiger riding levels. And she kinda sucks to play as. When I was younger, I was pretty psyched to finally get to play as Coco in regular levels after how underutilized she was in Crash 3. But in this game, she can't use any of the same moves as Crash, such as the slide, the Death Tornado Spin, or even the Fruit Bazooka. She can't even crouch. Instead, she does this low sweep kick that I ended up never using. So yeah, it's no Insane Trilogy Coco here. Oh, but don't you worry, she gets her own vehicle segments as well, in case you're worried about that. And that's a shame too, because the first level you get to play as her is gorgeous and has great music. In fact, the whole soundtrack is pretty fantastic. Nearly every level gets their own song, and I think only one song ever gets reused in the whole game, and they're all pretty fantastic. My personal favorite being the one for Wuthering Heights. It's surprisingly chilling for a Crash Bandicoot game. The soundtrack kinda didn't need to go this hard, but it's a serious highlight of Wrath of Cortex. Visually speaking, for an early PS2 game from 2001, it can look pretty gorgeous when it wants to. The combination of very lovely particle effects, sharp textures, and the game running in 60 frames per second with barely any dips in performance make this a pretty good looking game for its time. Granted, the character models do look a bit bland, and they don't really emote all that much, but the environmental detail are the real stars of the show here. I may hate the underwater levels more than life itself, but man, if they aren't pretty. I do kind of want to bring up a specific gripe I have with this game real quick, but you know what I don't get? There's a lot of levels that require you to swing across grates, and compared to Crash 2 and 3, it's slow as all hell in this game. I can't help but wonder why Traveler's Tales made this as slow as it did when the previous two games on PS1 had to move so much faster. And yeah, I know I'm using footage from the Insane trilogy here, but the PS1 originals had to move across monkey bars pretty quickly too. You'd think since Wrath of Cortex lifted so much from Crash 3, they'd at least get this part right. I mean, who playtested this? I don't know, I kinda smell rushed development on this one. And since Wrath of Cortex lifts so much from Crash 3, the time trials are back as well. Defeating the final boss for the first time unlocks the speed upgrade, and it's with this you'll have an easier time getting the time relics needed to unlock levels in the super secret 6th world. Getting all of the gems in all of the levels and defeating the final boss again will land you the canonical ending. Or as canonical as it can be with the upcoming Crash Bandicoot 4 seemingly retconning this game. But honestly, replaying many of these levels for the first time was a big enough pain in the ass for me, so going back for the gems and the relics just makes me tired. So since I'm not playing the PS2 version, I think I'll just go ahead and punch in this handy little code here, and BAM! All the crystals, gems, and platinum relics unlocked. It's like they knew no one wanted to play these levels again, so they included this code in the Xbox and GameCube versions. Just one more reason why the PS2 version is the weakest. The secret levels aren't really anything to write home about either. Just more vehicle levels, another ball rolling stage, and the obligatory darkness level. You're not missing much. And that about covers my thoughts on Crash Bandicoot: The Wrath of Cortex. It's just such an unfocused Crash game that had potential, but comes down under the weight of its own ambition. In my opinion, the over-reliance on the vehicle stages are what undoes this whole package. If Traveler's Tales had spent more time perfecting the standard platforming stages and made them the primary focus, then this could have been another rock-solid Crash game, and one that could have stood among the series' better offerings. But with the dev team trying all these other gameplay mechanics and not really perfecting any of them, ends up making this a weaker experience in my opinion. Even as a 12-year-old kid, I could still tell this game felt like an unpolished downgrade from the PS1 trilogy. There is still fun to be had here though, especially those regular platforming levels. This won't be the last time I'll ever pick this game up, if only for nostalgia's sake. Though, nowadays, if I need my Crash fix, I'm more likely to pick up the Insane trilogy. With the game that now calls itself Crash Bandicoot 4 on the horizon, I'm pretty optimistic about this new direction the series is headed in. It may be a bit too early to tell, but it looks like they're moving away from the jokey comedic direction that started with Crash Twinsanity, and just got more and more out of hand with the Mutant games. Two games that I myself admittedly haven't played. Crash Bandicoot was never a super dark series, but in its heyday, it also never really tried to be funny either. And that's how I personally prefer my Crash Bandicoot games, when they don't try and fail to be hilarious. It's why Rayman 3 rubbed me the wrong way the first time I played it after playing Rayman 2, but that's another story. I may do a review of Crash Bandicoot 4 when it comes out, so let me know in the comments if you want to see me do that one. And as always, thanks for watching.